Welcome back to our Lahore studios. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's begin the bulletin with the US, which says it wants a Congress-backed agreement with Iran to replace the 2015 nuclear deal. Now, Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, says the US may impose fresh sanctions to force Tehran to negotiate. He says the Gulf Arab states would be more effective if confronting Iran if they are united. Now, this comes as French President Emmanuel Macron's top diplomatic advisor is visiting Tehran for talks to save the 2015 deal. Iran's foreign ministry has welcomed French efforts to ease the crisis and reduce tensions. President Hassan Rouhani has repeated that Iran's uranium enrichment is peaceful and within the nuclear deal's framework. The US is building a military coalition to monitor and safeguard the strategic waters near Iran and Yemen. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Joseph Dunford says the US would provide command ships and lead surveillance for the alliance. Now, Dunford said the US hopes to enlist allies over the next few weeks.
We're engaging now with a number of countries to see if we can put together a coalition that would ensure freedom of navigation both in the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandab. And so
US allies have shared concerns regarding possible Houthi attacks in the Bab el-Mandab waterway. And meanwhile, Iran has welcomed France's efforts to save the 2015 nuclear deal. This comes as President Emmanuel Macron's advisor, Emmanuel Bon, visits Tehran to help ease tensions between the US and Iran. Earlier, Europe's nuclear deal signatories called an urgent meeting to discuss Tehran's compliance. The European co-signers have asked Tehran to stop enriching and stockpiling uranium with immediate effect. In a statement, the foreign ministers of Germany, France and Britain have called for a joint commission on the Iran issue. It said the compliance issues must be addressed within the framework of the JCPOA. Now, European allies' statement comes a day after UN inspectors confirmed that Tehran had begun enriching uranium over the stipulated limits. Europe has called an urgent meeting of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal signatories to discuss Tehran's compliance. Now, the European co-signers have asked Tehran to stop enriching and stockpiling uranium with immediate effect, as I stated earlier. In a statement, the foreign ministers of Germany, France and Britain have called for a joint commission on the Iran issue. It said the compliance issues must be addressed within the framework of the JCPOA. Now, for more on this development, we're joined from Singapore by Mr. James Dorsey, who is a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. So first of all, Mr. Dorsey, welcome to Indus News and thanks for your time. So what's the importance of this coalition, especially in the current situation, when it seems that tensions between the US and Iran still have the ability to escalate further?
As a matter of principle, the notion that states would be protecting their own commercial vessels in international waters where threats exist makes perfect sense. The problem with the U.S. Proposition is several-fold. One is that it will strengthen the position of the Saudis versus the Iranians rather than try and mediate an end to a debilitating conflict between the two. Second of all, given the U.S. policy towards Iran, America's allies are not certain of where the United States is going. And in some ways, objectives between senior officials in the Trump administration and senior officials of U.S. allies differ, and those have to be sorted out. And finally, of course, the Russians and probably the Chinese will not want to be part of this.
Well, Mr. Dorsey, European countries, of course, have called an urgent meeting regarding Iran, of course. Do you think that this initiative can help contain the tension?
I doubt it. For all practical matters, Iran is caught in a catch-22. It signed an international agreement with the United States and the other signatories, the Europeans, the EU, the Russians and the Chinese, and it has until recently abided by that decision, and nobody disputes that it has. So now it's being asked to abide by a deal that others in the deal no longer honor. And obviously there's an incongruency here. The Iranian regime clearly also has, like others do, domestic pressures. And as a result, I think that this is going to probably escalate rather than calm things down.
Well, you spoke about domestic pressures there, but of course, internationally, U.S. envoy James Hook says that divisions among Gulf Arab states have weakened their ability to confront Iran. So is Washington increasing pressure on Saudi Arabia and the UAE to sort of end their blockade of Qatar?
Not really. Of course, the United States, like other world powers, by the way, would like to see the Qatar or the Gulf crisis resolved. None of them have been willing or able, for that matter, to apply the sort of pressure that would force a negotiated solution. Frankly, none of the parties in the Gulf have a vested interest at this moment in a negotiated solution.
Well, thank you, Mr. James Dorsey. He was speaking to us there from Singapore, and we will keep you updated on that. For now, let's move on to Syria, where 107 people have been killed in a day of intense fighting in Syria's northwest Hama and Idlib provinces. Now, war monitors said 23 government soldiers were killed in an attack. They said the militants carried out attacks on the port city of Latakia. 16 rebels also died in clashes near the city. In Hama, 3 civilians were killed by rocket shelling carried out by ISIS militants. In the northeast Deir ez-Zor province, 7 children were killed during a government bombardment of ISIS hideouts. And in another development, monitors said 50 children have succumbed to illness at the nearby Al-Hol refugee camp. While Libyan officials say 100 migrants have been allowed to leave the Tripoli detention center hit by a deadly air raid a week ago. 53 migrants were killed and 130 others injured in the strike, blamed on eastern forces led by Khalifa Haftar. Officials say they allowed the migrants to walk free following protests against exclusion from the UN's evacuation list. It was not immediately clear where they intended to go. 110 others have chosen to remain at the center, saying they feel severely insecure. Let's go now to Kazakhstan, which has invited permanent members of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe for talks on resolving Afghanistan's problems. Now, this comes after the Taliban and Afghan delegates agreed to a roadmap for peace at the conclusion of 2 days of dialogue in Doha. Now, the planned talks in Kazakhstan in October will coincide with a meeting of the OSCE permanent members. Kazakh Foreign Minister Beybut Atamkulov says the talks will focus on the OSCE's involvement in the post-conflict rehabilitation of Afghanistan. The 57-member OSCE is the world's largest security-oriented organization. Well, Britain's ambassador to Washington, Kim Darroch, has resigned following the leak of confidential memos that branded the White House inept. President Donald Trump has bitterly criticized Darroch since the leak. In his resignation letter, the diplomat says that the current situation makes it impossible for him to carry out his role, as Prime Minister Theresa May regretted the resignation of Darroch and thanked him for his services to Britain.
Sir Kim has given a lifetime of service to the United Kingdom, and we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice. I want all our public servants to have the confidence to be able to do that.
Well, Britain's opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn says that the next Prime Minister must put Brexit to a second referendum. Now, the issue has deeply divided the Labour Party, but most MPs strongly support remaining in the EU.
Jeremy Corbyn says his party would campaign to stay in the European Union to avoid a no-deal Brexit. He stopped short of saying how he would solve the Brexit crisis if he were Prime Minister.
Labour is a party which says we will take no deal off the table and the people will have a choice in the future as to whether they remain in the European Union or they accept what would be very, very damaging no-deal exit from the EU, with the consequences for food prices, for medicine supplies and industrial investment.
Meanwhile, British lawmakers have narrowly backed a plan to hinder a no-deal Brexit push. The mayor could make it harder for the new Prime Minister to force Brexit by suspending Parliament.
Now, meanwhile, British MPs have narrowly backed a plan to hinder a no-deal Brexit push. Now, the measure could make it harder for the new Prime Minister to force Brexit by suspending the Parliament. The amendment to the Northern Ireland Bill to avoid a suspension was passed by one vote. It requires ministers to regularly report on the situation in Northern Ireland. Shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer called the approval a tight but important victory. Earlier, the frontrunner to become Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, refused to rule out suspending Parliament to force a no-deal Brexit. Germany's Social Democrat Party has said the ruling coalition will not split over the EU's choice of Ursula von der Leyen to head the European Commission. The SPD's Katharina Barley says she does not expect EU lawmakers from her left-leaning party to back the Defence Minister von der Leyen. Earlier, former SPD leader Sigmar Gabriel described her nomination as political trickery. Von der Leyen needs to be confirmed in her new job by an absolute majority of MEPs. Failure to confirm her as Commission President could trigger a political crisis. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been seen shaking for the third time in recent weeks. Merkel's new bout of trembling came as she met Finland's Prime Minister Antti Rinne during his visit to Berlin. Merkel appeared unsteady as she reviewed a military guard of honor. The previous shaking spells were blamed on dehydration. Top US and Chinese negotiators have re-engaged over their trade war for the first time since last month's G20 summit. US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin spoke to China's Vice Premier Liu He about restarting trade talks. Now, the White House says the telephone conversation was constructive and a face-to-face meeting of negotiators is expected soon. Meeting at the G20 summit, US President Donald Trump and China's President Xi Jinping agreed to resume talks before they broke down in May. In a related development, Washington has loosened a ban on US companies selling equipment to the Chinese tech giant Huawei. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says the ban will only apply on products having national security applications. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Monaco has become the first European country with full 5G coverage. Its Huawei-built system was activated after being checked for security flaws by Monaco Tel. Turkey has rejected the Greek and the European Union allegations that its drilling activity off Cyprus is illegitimate. The Interior Ministry says the EU cannot be an impartial mediator on the issue. Turkey has developed a second ship to drill for natural gas off the eastern coast of Cyprus for 3 months. The Cypriot presidency accuses Turkey of a grave violation, while an EU statement also rebukes it. The US and Egypt called on Istanbul to avoid stoking tensions in the eastern Mediterranean. While destruction due to heavy flooding in Russia's Siberian Irkutsk region continues and the death toll has risen to 24. Emergency services say 9 others are still missing, while 143 more have been hospitalized. Now, the government has declared a state of emergency in all affected areas of Siberia. The floods have put 83 settlements in 6 districts underwater, forcing 32,000 residents from their homes. Well, an artificial intelligence park has attracted visitors at the ongoing China Internet Conference. More details in this report.
The availability of advanced technological features includes experiences like fitting rooms. The main agenda of this conference is dominated by security in the rapid development of science and technology. The three-day conference will feature 30 thematic forums on 5G, Internet Protocol version 6, and intellectual property rights protection. The conference is a must for tech lovers.
The Internet inspires wisdom, and wisdom brings changes to our life. The future world is bound to see highly intensive interactions between humans and things in harmonious coexistence. There is more space for imagination in our wisdom.
A booming digital economy is reshaping China's economy as technological advances are reviving traditional industries as well as high-quality development.
And the Spanish city of Pamplona kicked off its annual bull running festival with a bang. Over 1 million people attend the festival each year, bringing a hefty contribution to the local economy. More in this report.
The Fighting Bulls of Cebada Gago Ranch caused very few injuries during the San Fermin's bull runs in Pamplona, Spain. Runners are often injured at traditional Spanish bull runs. This time, no one has died at Pamplona's festival since a Spanish man was gored in the neck by a Jandela bull 2009. Locals and tourists will join in the 8 a.m. run every morning until Sunday.
Very good time. Second time running here in Pamplona. First time ever being here. Second run. First one was yesterday, and what an experience that I've ever had. Adrenaline rush, just mental. So want to come back every year from now on. I'm hooked on Fiesta, and it's just what an amazing place. So.
The festival regularly provokes debate about the treatment of animals. 16 people have died during the event since 1910.
Oh, perfect. I had a great time. I ran yesterday, but got pushed down in a pile. Today it worked out perfect. I didn't get pushed down at all. I could keep up a little better. It's kind of knowing how to do it.
Injuries are common during the bull run, which has remained a staple of San Fermin despite animal welfare concerns.
Well, let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the News Bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. And as always, thanks for watching.